I have this tendency when I'm talking about fantasy books that I love, and I'm realizing as I find out more about myself, this is mostly applying to books that are more classic fantasy style, that I call them comfort food. But I'm realizing as I mature as a creator and as someone that talks about books, that when I say comfort food, most people think that to mean, happy, warm, and comfortable, which I mean. But I also sometimes will say that a fantasy series is comfort food. It will be very dark and very sad. But because it brings me to my happy place, which is some classic fantasy, as sometimes that phrase is lost in translation. I'm here today to talk about Assassin's Apprentice, the first book in the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. Robin Hobb is an author that I hear her name thrown around a lot in fantasy, but I don't see her books talked about. But I'm going to be a little bit different today and talk about a Robin Hobb book. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Kesara over at Reads with Kesara. She loves Robin Hobb and she talks about her all the time, and that was a huge encouragement for me to want to check her out because Kesara has a very awesome taste in books, and I love a lot of the books that she talks about. I was hoping I would love this. I did, but let's expound. Assassin's Apprentice was the first book that we read for our Patreon buddy read. If you want to join in on the Patreon buddy reads, you can see a link to my Patreon down below. But let's jump into it. Assassin's Apprentice is the story that starts off with an illegitimate child who has essentially blocked all of his memories from age birth through 6 out of his head because they're too traumatic. He's dropped off because nobody wants him, and he turns out he is the illegitimate son of the prince in line for the throne. And the theme of this kid, who eventually we get to know by the name of Fitz, being someone that people don't want around and people not valuing him, is a theme that sort of runs through the whole thing. As my intro to this video may indicate, this is a classic fantasy, and it is something that I loved. It felt very comforting and warm to me, even though Robin Hobb is a heartbreaker, dream maker, love taker, don't you mess around with me. She's very mean to Fitz and a lot of the characters in this book. I don't want to say this book is grimdark, but I do want to say it is realistic in the same way that kind of Daniel Green mentioned in his most recent Let's Debate video. You should go check that out, which is to say a lot of bad things happen, but good things also happen. The characters in this book, believable characters that have strong positive qualities, and even the ones with the most positive qualities oftentimes have major negative qualities as well. They're very human. Even the people in the story that may care for Fitz in a lot of ways do a bad job of showing Fitz love. And the way that he grows up, because we start with him as a 6-year-old and he grows up into probably his late teens, I think, in this book. I'm not 100% sure. But we get to see the way that he interacts with his peers as he is brought up in the royal adjacent lifestyle in this political fantasy world where there is an opposing force working from the outside to try to undermine this kingdom, while there might also be political ploys inside the kingdom bidding for power, which, as you might think, the illegitimate son of the next in line prince might be able to come into those schemes in certain ways. The title also indicates that he is an assassin's apprentice. It is a spoiler, but it's in the title. It's a book about Fitz becoming an assassin and the journey that takes him to that point, and the way that he goes through that journey. It's super interesting and super fun. But I say super fun because I very much enjoyed it. I'm trying to get better about the way that I talk about books. It is not super fun for the characters. It is a very sad tale. In the Patreon Discord discussion, I just would go off about how much Robin Hobb likes to torture the people in her story. All this being said, this book is more of a political fantasy. It has beautiful, beautiful prose. Like classic prose that is descriptive in a way that I found it refreshing after reading a lot of like Sanderson and other books that are more straightforward. I found Robin Hobb's writing just a joy to read. But the story doesn't have a lot of action. It's a lot of thinking and a lot of plotting and a lot of world building in a way that I don't want to say it's not exposition-y, but I felt that it kept up its pace throughout. And I was constantly curious what was going to happen next to the characters and to the moving pieces in the world. Because this book covers a time span that's a significant portion of Fitz's life, we actually get to see a lot of things that take time in a story get to progress all the way through. And we get to see characters develop over that course of time in ways that are believable and very engaging to follow. Like I said, they're very complex characters, and watching them develop over time, very, very, very good. But less so than some of the other books that I've been talking about recently, this may not be a book for everyone. It is significantly slower paced than the other books that I've been talking about recently. I found it an extremely good companion read with Rage of Dragons, because Rage of Dragons was all 10 all the time, extremely fast paced. This was more thoughtful and more beautiful and more sad in a contemplative way. Rage of Dragons was all action in every freaking chapter. This book has extremely little action. I think there's maybe a couple battles. Some of the aftermaths of other battles are described, but the actual fighting is not the key element here. The element here is the characters and the plot and the ways that they grow with the world around them as the state of the kingdom changes over time. I don't know if this is a book I would have liked when I was younger, and I know that there are a lot of people who I normally share interests with that I probably wouldn't recommend this book to. In fact, it is a book that I had heard a lot of good things about, but I wasn't in a hurry to read, which is why I'm glad that when we did the vote on the Patreon server, this one was chosen, because I may have pushed it off even longer. But, like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was glad that we picked it. And as soon as we started reading Robin Hobb's writing at the beginning of the book, I was sold immediately. I'll put a plug in here also. The audiobook is very good. The reader does a very good job portraying the characters and the emotions, and he reads it. The prose really jumps off the page. If you struggle reading slightly more literary or beautiful prose, like a little bit more flowery, not super flowery, but a little bit more flowery prose, the audiobook makes it really come alive. I read this going back and forth between audio and ebook. The book both ends in a satisfying way and also a way that leaves me just so excited to get into the next one. I'm planning on reading Royal Assassin next month, and I think that that's going to be awesome as well. This book does this like secret kind of trick where it is very upfront about being like a political fantasy book that almost feels like it could be realistic, because the things that are happening they seem like something that could have been in a history book, but at the same time, she sneaks in a significant amount of magic world building and like different powers there's multiple magic systems that exist in this world, and she slips it in a way that feels extremely natural. Part of me says, oh, this is almost like historical fiction, but then you think about it and you're like, actually, there's a lot of magic that she talked about here that you don't always catch. There's certain parts that focus more on the magic, but there's also parts where you're like, oh, the magic is so important in this world now. It's a significant part of the plot, but she kind of sneaks it in there in a way that's really cool. Aside from the pacing, which may not be to everyone's liking, there is a little bit of maybe awkwardness in some of the ways that, like, sometimes there'll be weird jumps in time or weird transitions will happen and it's easy to miss. Sometimes perspectives will change in a chapter and it's not always extremely apparent, so that could be a little bit confusing. But I did get used to it after a while. It does kind of fit the tone of the book, but it can be a little bit jarring at points. And all that being said, this was a solid 4-star book for me. It was the classic fantasy I didn't know I needed to give me that warm feeling of a comfort food home while also breaking my heart at every freaking turn of the story. It was the beautiful prose that I didn't realize that I wanted after reading so many super straightforward books. And it is another author for me to add to my list of authors I just want to read all of their content as fast as I can. That list is piling up. Have you guys read The Assassin's Apprentice? Is Robin Hobb an author you like? Is this a series that you think sounds interesting? I'm curious to hear all your thoughts in the comments down below. Also, if you would like to expand that discussion to a more usable format than just YouTube comments, down below in the description I have a link to my Patreon. Down below in the description I have a link to my Discord server, which is free for everybody to join. I have been having a blast participating in those discussions, seeing other people discuss things there. As always, if you'd like to join in on these buddy reads or have a say on what we read next, there's also a link to the Patreon down below with additional various, hopefully, I think, fun pieces of content that you get access to. Please remember to like this video if you liked it, and if you want to see more videos from me, please remember to hit the subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you again, and until next time, be excellent to each other. Also, that new movie's coming out soon. It seems like it could be very funny. Oh, real quick. Trigger warning, that's maybe a little bit of a spoiler. Animal death. A significant amount. Just warning.
No one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep. No one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep. No one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep. No one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.